Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, just when you thought the war of words between North Korea and America could not get any more heated, Pyongyang has pushed it up another notch. A statement from the dictatorship says it has a plan to launch missiles into the sea around the US Pacific Island territory of Guam. Washington has threatened a devastating response. From Guam, Rupert Wingfield-Hayes reports.
It may not look like it, but there is trouble in paradise. This little Pacific holiday island is now the focus of unwanted worldwide attention. And this is the reason. From North Korea today, this strangely detailed threat. The Hwasong-12 rocket will be launched by the Korean People's Army and will cross the sky above Japan, flying 3,356 kilometers for 1,065 seconds. Before hitting the waters 30 to 40 kilometers away from Guam. This is the Hwasong-12 missile, on parade in Pyongyang this spring. No one should doubt it can reach Guam. In recent months, North Korea has successfully tested a host of long-range missiles. The little holiday island is now well within Kim Jong-un's reach. But at the volleyball court, the locals seem strangely unperturbed.
I think we're kind of just used to the whole ebb and flow of hearing that we're going to be bombed and then it not happening and then hearing about it again. So it's not anything that's new to us.
It never follows through, so I wasn't really concerned. And I think it's probably like a distraction, maybe political kind of move, you know, on the US and Korea side, just to get attention maybe.
If North Korea's aim is to scare people, well, have a look. It doesn't seem to be working. Certainly people are not fleeing the beaches for the airport. But the threat against Guam is very specific. And that has a few people worried that maybe, just maybe, Kim Jong-un is planning some sort of action to fire one or more missiles over Japan in this direction. Guam's two huge military bases are home to a fleet of these B-1 bombers. It makes the island a very attractive target. The tourists on whom this island depends are already much more jittery than the locals.
I saw the news and immediately started checking where the US military bases on Guam are located. I'm worried.
Everyone here is hoping this latest threat is just more North Korean bluff. But they're also starting to wonder what they would do if it's not. Rupert Wingfield-Hayes, BBC News, in Guam.
Now, the North Koreans have said that President Trump talked a load of nonsense about fire and fury, and they've responded with a threat of their own, to launch 4 missiles into the sea off the US territory of Guam in the Pacific. Mr. Trump has begun a meeting with his national security advisors after his administration stood accused of being divided in how tough to be with Pyongyang. Our Foreign Affairs correspondent Jonathan Rugman has the very latest.
If anybody can match threats of fire and fury, it is North Korea. This newsreader in the reclusive dictatorship said Donald Trump had been speaking nonsense on a golf course again.
Sound dialogue is not possible with such a guy, bereft of reason, who is going senile. Only absolute force can work on him.
That force, he said, was 4 of these Hwasong-12 ballistic missiles. Ready, he said, to launch towards Guam in the Pacific by the middle of this month. The general in charge quoted as saying he was awaiting Kim Jong-un's final order. Guam is 2,086 miles from the North Korean missile base. The North Korean general in charge says the 4 missiles would fly over Japan and take 17 minutes and 45 seconds to reach a location some 20 miles or so offshore. The options for the Trump administration include a preemptive strike, intercepting the missiles mid-flight, retaliation afterwards, or giving diplomacy more time to stop the launch from happening at all. That last is being pushed by America's Secretary of State. No imminent threat from North Korea, he said yesterday, amid mixed signals and deep divisions in Washington.
I think Americans should sleep well at night. I have no concerns about this particular rhetoric of the last few days.
And as I said, they will be met with fire, fury, and frankly, power.
And that rhetoric on both sides has jangled nerves across the Pacific. Perhaps nowhere more than South Korea, where 10 million people live in a capital city just 30 miles from the North's border.
If North Korea commits provocations despite our stern warnings, it will face powerful and stern responses from our military and the alliance.
Guam itself is protected by some 7,000 American troops, and for many here the reality that this remote island might be a dictator's target is hard to take seriously. In what remains for now a dangerous game of chicken. This one, 30 feet high, appeared outside the White House this week. It's made in China though, and the Chinese are demanding both sides talk.
Jonathan Rugman reporting.
After 3 days of trading increasingly harsh words with North Korea, one might have expected Donald Trump to cool the rhetoric somewhat tonight. But he did the reverse. He told the North Koreans to get their act together or be in trouble like few nations have ever been. And he said maybe his earlier promise to hit them with fire and fury wasn't strongly worded enough. Given that any confrontation could easily escalate quickly into an all-out war, the rest of us can only watch nervously as the possibility of armed conflict appears to creep ever closer.
Walking right back into controversy, shoulder to shoulder with the Vice President, no hint of contrition, just another blast of pure Trump.
Maybe it wasn't tough enough. They've been doing this to our country for a long time, for many years. And it's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough. If North Korea does anything in terms of even thinking about attack of anybody that we love or we represent or our allies or us, they can be very, very nervous. I'll tell you what, and they should be very nervous because things will happen to them like they never thought possible, okay? He's been pushing the world around for a long time, and I have great respect for what China and what Russia did, and those 15, we got a 15-0 vote. I have great respect for China and Russia, what they did on sanctions.
All in direct response to the latest North Korean military threat. State media announced 4 rockets would be launched towards Guam before mid-August. The Hwasong rockets don't carry nuclear weapons, but the White House still finds it intolerable.
We don't talk for the sake of talking when the stakes are dire. I don't want to talk about scenarios of war, but I will tell you that this President, Donald J. Trump, will take whatever measures necessary to protect the United States and her citizens.
At the Pentagon, there is a preemptive strike plan, which one former general fears they may have to use.
I don't even think they need to hit Guam to have us consider this an unacceptable military provocation that would result not only in trying to shoot down the missiles, but indeed in a preemptive attack on North Korea.
For the American people, these are frightening times.
A little shocked at the way he's handling the situation. Yeah.
And do you think it could actually end up in war?
Absolutely. And I don't think he has any qualms about that.
Mum disagrees?
Mum disagrees, yes. I really don't think it would end up in war. I would think that the North Korean dictator would stop short of that.
It's scary. All of us are scared by it. I mean, you don't say things like that and expect it to go on. It's 2 guys that are crazy, you know, competing with each other to see which one can be out crazy the other one, and sooner or later they're going to do it.
So often a figure of fun, an inflatable chicken has come to roost at the White House. Voters must trust that President Trump realises this is the most serious and deadly decision of his life. Juliet Bremner, News at 10, Washington.
Well, if America's showdown with North Korea did turn hot in military parlance, both sides have significant numbers of arms and soldiers ready for action. Indeed, both have arguably been preparing for confrontation for more than 60 years, since the Korean War was halted, in fact, by a temporary armistice that was meant to lead to a peace treaty but never did.
For decades, North Korea has been developing its missile threat. Now, with the weapon being paraded here, it says it's ready to take on a superpower.
The regime's latest threat involves this missile. They call it the Hwasong-12. Their stated target, the waters around the Pacific island of Guam, home to a US military base. The 2,000-mile distance would show a huge increase in North Korea's missile capability. So far, their test firings have only travelled 600 miles. But while ballistic missiles are America's greatest fear, Pyongyang's massive conventional forces pose a potentially larger threat. Their army has more than 1 million soldiers, and while much of their artillery is Soviet-era, lined along the demilitarized zone, it could inflict major damage on Seoul. Facing them, South Korea and the Americans have almost 700,000 military personnel, with another 3 million in reserve. Significantly, in light of the latest threat, the South's defences were reinforced this year by a US THAAD defence system, which can shoot down ballistic missiles fired from the north. Those who've dealt directly with the regime say while the North is no match for America's might, it could inflict terrible losses even in defeat.
There is the potential for a considerable loss of life, and however quick the retaliation, the North Koreans probably could inflict that sort of damage at the very beginning.
While most will hope it all turns out to be rhetoric and posturing from two unconventional leaders, on the first potential target, Guam, American bomber crews are having to ready themselves in case it's not. Paul Davis, News at 10.
And we're live again tonight in both Washington and Beijing with Juliet Bremner and Debbie Edward. Juliet, perhaps we can chat to you first. You talked about preemptive strike plans in your report there. I mean, are the Americans going to wait and see what happens, or do you think we can expect them to act first?
Well, the president was asked directly about that, and he said he didn't want to talk about it because he didn't want to give the enemy a tactical advantage. But if you cut through what he was saying and all that slight bluster that we heard there, I think you did get an indication of perhaps where his red lines lie. He was talking about if they dare come anywhere near our friends, our allies, our territory, then they will see just how powerful we are. And he went on to hold another press conference with his national security advisor, another general by his side, in which he said, let's see what they do in Guam. And he said, he, meaning Kim Jong-un, if he goes there, he will see things like he's never seen before. And he said, this is not a dare, it is a statement. So I think that suggests that he means if they do anything like firing a rocket towards Guam, that would be when the Americans might unleash their power. But the problem with that is that even if that's the case, this whole strategy means that you have a lot of room for misunderstandings, for miscalculations. And I think the fear is that Korea may not get the message that he's intending to send, which is just stop now. They may misinterpret it, and that's where the deadly consequences would lie.
OK, Juliet. Well, Debbie, perhaps I can ask you. We haven't heard 3 days in much from the Chinese leadership. What do you think its options really are at this point? What can they do?
Well, this silence from China is not altogether surprising. As you'll know, Tom, the president and his government ministers here don't routinely react to news events like we see in the UK, seemingly no matter if it is as unprecedented as we're seeing now. As for what they can do, well, the Chinese government had hoped that the sanctions, the UN sanctions introduced on Saturday, would be enough to take the pressure off them and put the pressure on North Korea to back down. Clearly, the opposite has happened, and it seems to have taken them by surprise, and they are now considering their next move. The Chinese want to stay well clear of this dangerous game of brinkmanship being played by President Trump and Kim Jong-un. They won't want to get involved in that at all until something is said or done that directly threatens China's interests. But a state newspaper editorial here tonight has said action will be taken if any side threatens status quo in the region. It urged Washington and Pyongyang to exercise restraint mind and have said to them to avoid any strategic war that was triggered by a reckless exchange of words.
OK, Debbie in Beijing and Julia in Washington, thank you very much indeed.
Donald Trump made more comments on North Korea this evening. Interesting ones, actually, because he gave the impression he was reiterating his fire and fury comments of the other day. But you could think of it as toning those remarks down significantly. I'm joined by the BBC's Washington correspondent, Rajini Vaidyanathan, I think. Or do we have a clip? Yeah. Oh, let's hear a little bit of Donald Trump. Let's hear a bit of Trump.
It's about time that somebody stuck up for the people of this country and for the people of other countries. So, if anything, maybe that statement wasn't tough enough. And we're backed by 100% by our military. We're backed by everybody.
OK, let's talk to Rajini. And Rajini, he said quite a lot in answers to questions there. Did you feel he was ramping it up or toning it down?
I think, Evan, it was a bit of both. In many ways, this is similar to a pattern that we've seen before with President Trump, where he makes a perhaps off-the-cuff remark, then his aides rail it back, and then he comes back guns blazing, reaffirming it even stronger. And so in that rhetoric, President Trump said he wished he'd actually gone tougher and been stronger than saying he was just going to unleash fire and fury. But when you peel that rhetoric away and look at exactly what it means, well, some journalists asked, well, what is tougher than fire and fury? And he said, well, we'll see, we'll see. Now, President Trump did say that he was open to negotiations, but then said negotiations never work. They certainly haven't for decades when it comes to North Korea. He also refused to be drawn on whether or not he's planning a preemptive strike. But crucially, he also called on China to do more.
Well, I was going to say, because actually, in some ways, interpreting what he's saying, all of this could be for Chinese ears. You have to think about what he's saying in relation to the Chinese.
That's absolutely right, Evan. In many ways, this was as much a message to Beijing as it was to Pyongyang, because in many ways they are the power brokers in all of this in terms of reaching a diplomatic solution to this ongoing crisis. Now, that is also because Beijing is a key trading partner with North Korea. So in many ways, in terms of putting economic pressure on Pyongyang, well, it's really down to China. Crucially, of course, those United Nations sanctions that we saw last week being voted in were signed up by China and by Russia. So that is a key thing there. But I think what this shows overall is that despite the rhetoric that we're hearing from President Trump, his promise of fire and fury, he knows that right now he can't deliver that fire and fury in a vacuum. He does still need cooperation, and it's worth pointing out, of course, that President Trump has a bit of a love-hate relationship with China. We've seen him play golf with President Xi at Mar-a-Lago and shower him with praise, and then months later send tweets saying that he's simply not doing enough. So it's clearly that relationship with China is a tricky one for President Trump to manage, but clearly a crucial one.
Rajini, thanks very much indeed.
I've been